I was 12 years old the first time my mother let me hold a client's grief in my own 2 hands, distilled down to 3 careful drops in a vial no bigger than my smallest finger, and she told me something I have never once forgotten. She said, "Feeling is the only honest currency there is, Anaya. Everything else people pay you with is just paper pretending to be worth something." I have spent 17 years since that morning proving her right, one bottle at a time. I want you to understand that before I tell you about the binding mark on my wrist and what it costs a woman like me to fall in love, I want you to understand what I already had, so you know exactly what I was risking. Embergate wakes up smelling like copper and citrus and lamp oil. If you're standing where I stand most mornings, waist deep in House Vane's distillery with my sleeves rolled to the elbow and my forearms already stained amber from yesterday's work, the whole cliffside city is built on trade spires stacked one over the other down to the harbor, and ours has stood at the same crooked angle for 3 generations. Glass bottles catching the sunrise in every window, like the building itself is trying to hoard the light. I was measuring out a courage draw that morning for a duelist who couldn't afford to lose his nerve at noon, and thinking, the way I always think in the last unremarkable moment before everything changes, that I was exactly where I was always going to be. Every licensed scent witch in this city wears the same thing I do, a spiral mark burned into the inside of the wrist the day she signs the guild ledger, small and dark as a coiled thread. Mine has been quiet and steady my whole working life, humming along under my pulse the way it's supposed to, drawing feeling clean out of a willing subject and fixing it into glass. There is exactly one condition on that ledger, the only one that's ever mattered to me. A bound witch who falls in love loses her gift, not metaphorically. The mark grays, wilts, and whatever made you valuable simply stops answering when you reach for it. I had never once in 17 years found that clause difficult to keep. Nothing in my life had ever been worth testing it. Lady Isabel Farrow holds House Vane's contract, which is a polite way of saying she owns the paper that says what we're worth, though to her credit she's never once treated us like property in the way some patrons do. She swept into the distillery that morning trailing pearl gray silk and a new household guard I hadn't met yet, and announced, without preamble, that she'd finally hired someone competent enough to stop her steward from drowning in unpaid debts to men who collect on debts with more than paperwork. "Rurik," she said. "He'll be handling the household's less pleasant business from now on. Try not to bottle his temper, Anaya. I rather think I need him irritable." He was standing half in the doorway shadow, which I understand now was deliberate. A man used to keeping most of a room between himself and whatever might need watching, broad through the shoulders in a way that filled the frame without trying to, dark hair cropped close, a scar cutting clean through one eyebrow that made his whole face look like it was permanently asking a question. He wasn't looking at Isobel while she talked about him. He was looking at my workbench, at the rows of stoppered vials catching morning light, with the specific unguarded interest of a man who has never been anywhere near this much bottled feeling in his life and doesn't entirely trust it.
"You're the one who does the actual bottling,"
he said. When Isobel finally paused for breath, and it wasn't quite a question, his voice had gravel in it, low and unhurried. Not the lady who signs for it." I told him, yes, that was rather the whole arrangement, and he nodded slowly like he'd confirmed something he'd already suspected.
"I've smelled the cheap version of what you make.
"Cool," said.
Rationed to soldiers before a push. Doesn't smell anything like this."
He didn't say it as a compliment exactly. He said it like a man setting a fact down carefully on a table between us to see what I'd do with it. I finished the courage draw while they talked logistics, watching Rurik out of the corner of my eye more than I meant to, the way he catalogued the room without seeming to move his head, doors, exits, the particular hinge creak of the far window. When the duelist second came to collect the vial, I walked it out to the courtyard myself, mostly for an excuse to pass close by where Rurik stood at the gate, and he stepped aside from me with a small, exact motion, close enough that I caught something under the leather and gun oil of him. Wood smoke, and underneath that, so faint I almost dismissed it, the unmistakable, stale, sweet edge of old bottled courage, the kind a body doesn't forget once it's been dosed on it too many times. I filed that away without meaning to. A scent, which spends her whole life reading what people carry on them without being told. It's simply how I'm built, and a man who smells faintly of old military courage rations doesn't get that smell by accident. But it wasn't my business, and I told myself so twice, briskly, the way you tell yourself anything you'd like very much to keep thinking about. The trouble started that same afternoon with a client I'd bottled for a dozen times before, a merchant's wife ordering a desire vial for her husband's homecoming, the kind of order I could fill half asleep. I drew from her the way I always do, gentle, practiced, feeling the warm, familiar pull of it flow down into the glass. And then, right at the very end, under the honest warmth of what she'd actually given me, I caught a thread that didn't belong to her at all, a colder, thinner note, like a second voice bleeding faintly through a wall. Not her longing. Something else's, something already inside the vial before I'd even finished filling it. I held the bottle up to the light for a long moment, telling myself it was cross-contamination, a dirty stopper, some ordinary failure of craft I'd simply catch and correct. I have made that kind of mistake exactly never in 11 years of licensed work, but I told myself the story anyway because the alternative, that something had already been in that glass waiting before her feeling ever touched it, was not a story I had any framework for yet. I almost went straight to Rurik with the bottle right then, before I stopped myself and did the thing I actually needed to do first, which was find my sister. Priya was in the back room where she always is at that hour, elbow deep in inventory ledgers she has no formal right to be touching yet, 19 and sharp-featured and restless in a way I recognize because I used to be exactly that restless myself before the work wore the edges off me. She's not bound to the guild yet. That comes at 20, same as it came for me. But she already has enough of the family gift in her that she can feel a wrongness in a room before she can name it, and she looked up from the ledgers the second I walked in like she already knew something had gone sideways. "You got your unraveling a knot face on," she said. I told her it was nothing, an off-batch, and she didn't believe me for a second, because she's never once believed a lie of mine that wasn't airtight, and this one wasn't close. I didn't tell her about the second voice in the glass. Whatever it was, I wanted it solved and gone before it ever had a chance to become her problem too. That's the whole shape of what I owe her, I think. Not protection exactly, but time. A little more ordinary time before the guild gets its hands on her the way it already has mine. Rurik was still at the gate when I came back out shaken, and whatever showed on my face made him straighten off the wall he'd been leaning against.
Problem? Got.
He asked, and I almost brushed past him the way I'd brush past anyone else's concern that wasn't paid for. Something about the flat, careful way he watched me stopped me instead. "Don't know yet?" I said honestly, which surprised me more than it seemed to surprise him. Something in a bottle that shouldn't be there. His jaw tightened, just slightly, a reaction that had nothing to do with polite concern and everything to do with a man recognizing a shape he already knew.
Show me.
"Cool," said, and I did, which I would come to understand much later was the first true mistake of my life. Not because he was wrong to ask, but because some part of me had already decided, standing there with amber-stained hands and a wrongness I couldn't yet name, that I wanted him close enough to keep asking. Part 2, tomorrow.